Kwame Christian, thank you so much for coming on the show. And, just to introduce you, you are a best-selling author, Finding Confidence in Conflict and Having Difficult Conversations About Race. You're founder and CEO of the American Negotiation Institute, which is truly impressive. You have the #1 podcast on negotiation, Negotiate Anything, with 10 million downloads, hundreds of 5-star reviews, which is super impressive in itself because those reviews are quite hard to get. I know that from this podcast. You put a message at the end of every podcast, and do people hit that ratings review? Well, yes, they do. On your show, they do. And your TEDx, 500,000 views of your TEDx. And I will say that pace, the tone, the intonation, it really is a great TEDx to watch. I really enjoyed it. And there was a lot of jokes. So it was really quite a fun one to watch. You write for Forbes. You're a self-professed chess nerd. You're a family man, which I love. You've got 2 boys, an amazing wife. You're a lawyer. You're a specialist in handling conflict, and you're on the show, and I am pumped. Thank you so much for coming on and talking to us today.
Hey, Tim, it's my pleasure. And listen, for all of your listeners, the only reason the show is #1 is because I have great guests like Tim Castle coming on the show, blessing us with his wisdom. So I appreciate you joining me for that episode back in the day.
You are too kind, my friend. You are too kind. So to kick things off, let's start with, this is all about negotiation. It's all about influence. It's all about persuasion. But what would your definition of negotiation be?
Yes. I like simple definitions. And so the definition I like to use is anytime you're having a conversation and somebody in the conversation wants something, that's when you're negotiating. And I landed on that definition for a very specific reason, because one of the biggest barriers people have when it comes to negotiation is that they have low negotiation awareness. They don't even recognize that these negotiations are happening. So they don't have that trigger to say, oh, this is a time where I can use these skills. So you might just say, this is an annoying conversation, a difficult conversation, and then you just go in the conversation and emote and hope for the best. But when you say, oh, no, this is just another version of a negotiation that I'm having with my wife, my kids, my colleagues at work, now it is a trigger to trigger that mindset and that skill set that you can need to have the conversation more effectively.
I love that. So you're already teaching people to recognize that negotiation's everywhere and
Exactly.
they can negotiate anything. Like it's literally, yeah. See what I did there? No, it's cool, man, because that's essentially it, right? You want to be maximizing the skills. And if you don't know when it's happening, how can you maximize the skills? Because you already missed the boat, right? And so you're just showing people that there's so much more to get out of life, really, because this is all about success and being able to elevate through negotiation, through influence. What can someone do then, right? And I know your TEDx talks about this, you're big on this, but like difficult conversations, challenging conversations, they're scary. They trigger fear, they trigger anxiety, and the things that we typically don't want to do. But I hear you speak around, there's a lot of opportunity in them if we can unlock them. Like, what is behind a difficult conversation and how can we prepare ourselves better?
Yeah, I think when it's important to understand the anatomy of these difficult conversations, because we are having a conversation right now. We wouldn't classify this as difficult. So what is it that makes it difficult? And so I think the biggest thing, the biggest signal that we need to pay attention to is emotionality. Emotionality is one of the key factors that makes these conversations tough. Either your emotions, their emotions, or both of your emotions at the same time can make it challenging. And then the other part is going to be resistance. There's some kind of divergent interests at play. So you want this, I want that. There's a little bit of tension. We have to figure out how to work through it. And so I think it's that tension of the different interests at play and the emotionality that goes along with it that makes it tough. And so when you think about it this way, you can say, okay, well, what is the core issue here? Because before we even get to the substantive issue, like the actual problem in the real world that needs to be resolved, we have to first lower the emotional temperature of the room so we can actually have a level-headed conversation and then get to the problem-solving process. Because a lot of times we put the cart before the horse. We say, okay, this is the problem. I want to solve it. This is the issue we need to deal with. And then we start running into this wall of emotion and we don't understand why our words don't seem to work.
I love this. And I love that you started with that because that's it. You've got to bring those walls down. But in negotiation with a lot of the different experts and things you might read in books and just out there, I think as well, and I think me and you have similar philosophies and we've discussed this at length before, but like, what about someone manipulating your emotions to because they know that, right? And you know, as you being the negotiator and the expert negotiator, you're saying, well, I need to lower the emotional temperature in the room. So I'm going to be, but what if you're dealing with someone that's just vicious in that sense and they're there to win and they're just like, I'm going to trigger you and I know what you're
Mhm.
doing and I see you coming. How do you tackle that, knowing that you're an expert, knowing that you've got to lower the emotional center of the room and actually deal with that person who's not only being difficult in a difficult conversation, but they're taking it really far. They're really cranking up the tension.
It's tough. First of all, we have to just acknowledge the difficulty of that, because we all have our triggers in difficult conversations. So we need to be mindful of that. And so we're going to have these situations where there are going to be people who are genuinely emotional, ramping it up. And then there are going to be people who are manipulative and are doing it intentionally, ramping it up. And as in the heat of the moment, it's really hard, dare I say, impossible to be able to tell the difference. And so, one of the things that I encourage people to do is try to stop playing the role of mind police, where we try to investigate the intentions of the other side when it comes to their behavior. Because what ends up happening is if we say, this thing is happening to us, this bad behavior is happening to us, and they're doing it intentionally to hurt our feelings, that makes us feel worse about the situation. So it essentially magnifies the emotional damage that we're receiving. And so if we just think about it, okay, let's make a read. This is emotion coming at me. Whether it's real or fake, it's emotion coming at me. The same rules would apply. And so the tool that I like to use is compassionate curiosity. So it's a 3-step process. And what we do is first, acknowledge and validate the emotions. Second, get curious with compassion. And third, joint problem solving. This is typical win-win negotiation where we're just working together. That's step 3. But we have to earn our way there by lowering the emotional temperature of the room and getting curious, gathering information, and then we get there. Now, what's interesting is if the person is genuinely emotional, by acknowledging and validating the emotion by saying, hey, Tim, it seems like this is having an impact on you, or I
Mm,
can tell this matters a lot to you, or it seems like this is really frustrating you. And then giving you the space to vent and then validating that, not agreeing, just
mm,
validating. But after you vent and you explain, okay, I can see where you're coming from. I'm going to show them that they're heard. That's the empathy part of it. That lowers the emotional temperature of the room. Now the question is, what if they're doing it on purpose? And they're like, no, I'm going to still ramp this up. That psychology doesn't work because I'm doing this on purpose.
mm,
What happens is by you just staying firm and not adjusting your position or crumbling under the pressure, at some point in the conversation, they're going to realize, hey, Tim isn't breaking. When
mm,
I'm going into steamroller mode and I'm trying to bully people, usually they capitulate, usually
mm.
they give up. And this person is unreasonably reasonable. So
Mm.
it puts them in a position where they say, I have to change my course, I have to change my tactics. So eventually it's kind of like a boxer who punches himself out. I just do not have any more emotional energy to give. So whether or not they're doing it intentionally or they're experiencing genuine emotionality, the same process will still work.
Kwame, you just went straight for the good stuff. And I know I threw a tough one in there. And I want to crank it up because the listeners on this show, like the guys and girls that listen to this show, they're typically entrepreneurs with big businesses and they're facing situations like this. And whether they're anxious because of the emotion that they might receive from the other person, or they just have a manipulative negotiator or someone that, like, it's either one. But what you did there, you just gave the gold on how to handle both of those situations. So I know that people can take that emotional center right down, or they can stand firm and have that confidence, because that's what it is, right? If you're going to be broken and you're going to let that other side
Yeah.
use the manipulation, then you've accepted that manipulation. So what you're
Right.
suggesting there is stand tall, stay confident,
Exactly.
know
Exactly.
your
And
value.
here's the thing, it's easier said than done because we've all been in that tough situation. And the thing is, this is simple. The advice is simple.
Mm,
Everybody listening can understand that, but that doesn't make it easy because under the heat of the moment, when you're feeling that pressure, you're going to want to do things to release that pressure. And I think once we understand the anatomy of this pressure based persuasion process, alliteration for you, then we can understand how to deal with it, right? Because then we can say, I'm feeling pressure, and this pressure is telling me to do what. So for me, I'm a people pleaser at heart. So for
Mm.
me, if I feel that pressure, I just kind of want to give in. Other people, they might be more aggressive, so they feel that pressure and they want to lash out. And what we have to understand is that we're going to have our natural tendencies, and we have to understand what we're feeling and recognize this is a feeling. That doesn't mean that I need to act on that feeling. So let's put on my chess nerd hat really
Mm.
quickly.
Mm.
So in chess, there's this term called productive tension. So you might be at a point in a game where there's a piece right next to each other, and either I can kill your piece or you can kill my piece. And sometimes when you do an analysis of the board, the right answer, the right thing to do is to leave your piece right there, knowing that the person could capture and you don't capture either. But for novice chess players, they feel that pressure and they don't like that. They're like, man, their gun is pointed at me, and mine is pointed at them. Somebody needs to shoot. I need to shoot first, right? So they take the piece to alleviate that pressure and tension that they're feeling, but in doing so, they put themselves in a bad position. And I think expert negotiators are the ones who can feel that pressure, feel that tension, and recognize what needs to be done in the moment. And sometimes it's just simply standing tall, standing firm, and absorbing that pressure, but maintaining that strong position.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. This is so good. And this is why everyone should get into the American Negotiation Institute. Like, how did your journey? I mean, we'll go back to compassionate curiosity in a minute, but like, how did you get into negotiation, and what started the Institute? Like, what brought you to that?
Yeah, man, it's an interesting journey because for me, like I said, recovering people pleaser. So I was profoundly bad
Mm.
at this for the majority of my life until I got to law school. And I just happened to take a negotiation class simply because it fit into my schedule. I'm like, oh, let's do this. And it was the first time that I saw that this was a skill, not a talent. I could learn how to get better at this. So it was incredibly empowering. So every time that I negotiated effectively and stood up for myself, it was a vote of confidence for the man that I wanted to be. And so we had these negotiation competitions. So I tested my skills there. We won the competition at the law school, and then we won the competition at the American Bar Association competition in Canada. And so I was hooked. And
Oh my
so even
goodness.
more so than me actually negotiating, I said, listen, if I'm struggling with this, there are probably people all around the world who are struggling with the same thing. So I wanted to create something that could help people to feel more empowered to have the conversation. So for us, the American Negotiation Institute, our motto is we believe the best things in life are on the other side of difficult conversations. So our goal is to help change the world one difficult conversation at a time.
Man, and I do think you're doing that. Like, difficult conversations, they do stop us. They're almost like barriers that we need to, psychological barriers that we need to break through. But the thing I've found is that you can almost go into an interaction. If we take your definition of negotiation, and that's any interaction that someone wants something, suddenly you can be in a difficult conversation when you didn't even realize it was going to be a difficult conversation. And there you are, emitting all of this body language and all this stuff. And you're like, hey, Kwame's taught me all these things. And that's when it needs to kick in, right? But if you don't have the skills, you're just in the middle of this awkward, difficult conversation, not addressing the conflict. Like, is that resonating? Like, is that what you find when you go and you train these companies and individuals?
Absolutely. And that's one of the scariest things when we go into a conversation and we're not expecting it to be tough. And I think one
Mm.
of the toughest parts of communication is in general is when your obvious doesn't match their obvious. And so here's what I mean. So there's sometimes where we think there's an obvious right answer. Yeah, we should definitely do this. I'm going into this conversation just talking to Tim. I'm going to communicate. He'll absorb my
Mm.
wisdom and then he'll be enlightened like me. That's how the conversation should go. Right. And then you, oh, dare I say, have an opinion that might differ from mine. And so we find ourselves in this situation where I cannot believe that you disagree with me. And so we feel threatened. And I think one of
Mm.
the things that we have to consider is the role of the ego here too,
Mm.
because a lot of times we get into these conversations and we identify so strongly with our positions that we don't understand that there's a difference between who I am and what I happen to believe at this moment. And so we get into these conversations where I'm identifying really closely with what I believe. You're identifying really closely with what you believe to the point where you feel like it's part of yourself and I feel like it's part of myself. So I feel like if I adjust, I'm losing part of myself. So it feels
Mm.
like an existential threat. If I agree with you, then who am I? right? And so that's why we can see in these conversations, it's almost like we're seeing two people that are fighting for their lives. They feel like that emotionally, but it's because we have to recognize when it comes to negotiation, it's an issue of mindset and skill set. It's not just knowing what to do, what to say, and how to say it. It's also about having the mindset that allows you to do that in the moment. So that comes down to emotion management. That also comes down to lowering your ego so you can actually be more present. There's so much to go that goes into this. And what you're recognizing, listeners, you're probably going to see this too. This is more than just a skills-based conversation. Once you become better at negotiation, it's a transformational experience for yourself, because it's not just about tactics and doing things to get people to change their perspective. It's about becoming the person that you need to be, not just in the moment, but doing that self work beforehand, so you can appear as your best self during the tough conversations.
Yeah, so much of this is about self-reflection, self-awareness, right?
Yes.
At the
Yeah.
deepest, it's deep, super deep. Like a lot of what you're saying is like we almost got to let go of who we think we are, let go of the emotion and not judge it when it's coming at us. So we're not pre-defining what that story means to us, but also let go of our perspective on something, because that is just a perspective, it's a position, and we're wedded to it. So it's almost like it's almost in a way like a disadvantage, because we're just fixated on that, and we're just there to kind of convince from that perspective and say this is fact and anything other than that isn't, and I just need you to. And so yeah, this is brilliant. So what do you define conflict as then? Like if you were thinking about conflict and difficult conversations, like what's a conflict?
Yeah. So my negotiation definition, like I said, anytime you're having a conversation and somebody wants something, my definition of conflict is a negotiation with attitude. That's really it. You know, it is, it's the same thing as a negotiation, but there's an emotional element that makes this particularly challenging. And, you know, when you think about it that simply, you realize, oh, okay, then what I need to do in my difficult conversations is I need to lower that emotional temperature, turn it into a simple negotiation so we can actually converse on the
Mm.
substance, right? And that's really it. And so, the thing that is really, I think, hard for people to accept and absorb is the fact that just because you're intelligent, just because you're successful, just because you're smart and you know your industry, that does not really matter as it relates to the persuasive process. I mean, that's an important part of the process, and we should just assume that you're competent, right? But that simple competence is not enough to win the day, because we've all run into that situation where it seems like our facts don't work. What
Mm.
if your truth is different from my truth? How do I work through that? And a lot of times it turns us into intellectual bullies, where we just say, I'm going to force feed this person facts, data, and logic until they capitulate. But again, what ends up happening is something called psychological entrenchment. They become more entrenched, because now it's not just about figuring out the best solution here. It's about me versus you. And we can feel that intellectual superiority coming from the other side. And then we feel like we need to match that. And it becomes a war of wills. But if you can sit back and realize, no, 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 first and foremost, before we get into the money, before we get into the substance, these are two humans. We have these emotional needs. This person needs to be validated. This person needs to be heard. Simply just sticking to the basics, listening, managing emotions. A lot of times, really, that's all you need. And I think it's almost insultingly simple for high performers to realize that people just need to be heard and appreciated and validated. And we just want to get to the substance so quickly. And I think a lot of times it's because we are unwilling to be vulnerable ourselves. And that makes it hard for us to open ourselves up to the emotionality and feelings of other people.
Wow. So yeah, so it's the fact that we aren't vulnerable that then can't see the vulnerability in others. We're not able, and with that, we're not able to get that reciprocity, right? Because if we're not like leading different information, we're not opening, we're not trusting, there's that law of reciprocity that will kick in if we're able to share some information up front and kind of show them that we're able to be vulnerable and then we're here to build, then
Exactly.
it should kick in that way. Wow. Yeah, I can see much more now how self-reflection and self-awareness and knowing what's right for the situation and taking yourself, we're almost removing your mission out of it, like what you know, because that is so, I did it last week. It was a difficult conversation. I had one. I sat down, didn't know it was going to be difficult. but I messed up, right? I wasn't thinking it was going to be difficult. And it just became a battle of who knows what, like just what you've said, like intellectual. It was almost like, well, I've done this and you've done this, and you're not right. And it was just, we were wedded to positions, but none of us were right in that conversation. And that's the problem. No one won, no one. And I came away from it going, I know I've messed something up here. This wasn't how I thought this was going to go. And it was all me, right? It was all my contribution was I wasn't being vulnerable to go, hey, this person just needs to be helped. I wasn't using my own philosophies. Because I just thought it wasn't actually going to be a different conversation. Then I found myself winning one. But yeah, I totally concur in the fact that you need to be able to let the other person be heard and validated. So
Yeah.
there we are. We've got into the stage where we're understanding that emotions need to come down. What were the other parts of that curiosity part of dealing with the difficult conversation? Because I think there's a lot of value in that.
Absolutely. So we stay in that first step, acknowledge and validate emotion until we recognize that emotionality dropping, whatever it is, the signal. So we might recognize a change in the tone, a softening of the body language, lowering of the shoulders, that level of tension. Okay, we're getting those signals that we can now proceed. And so now we get to that point of getting curious with compassion. And so one of my favorite things to ask during my trainings is, have you ever been in a conversation and somebody accused you of yelling, but you didn't think you were yelling? And everybody laughs because we've all been there, right? And so the reality is you were yelling. And it's not it's not because of decibel level. You know, you might not have been like increasing your volume, but you sound like a jerk. Your tone is off. And so that's why I didn't just say, hey, get curious. No, it's get curious with compassion. And now we don't need to get into like a really nuanced definition of what compassion is. But what we need to do is we need to recognize that as we're asking these questions, we need to do it with a tone that does not trigger that emotionality back in return. So when you think about the psychology of mirror neurons, these are nerve receptors that reflect back the emotionality that they see. So that's why if you're in a room and somebody yawns, other people are going to yawn. And there's going to be a small percentage of your podcast listenership that will yawn as soon as I say the word yawn.
Just because you,
right? It is. Hey, and also watch this, Tim. If you yawned after you heard me say that, give Tim a 5-star review, please. And
oh yeah.
So we have to recognize that sometimes, even if we do a good job of acknowledging and validating the emotions and lowering the emotional temperature of the room, then when we get to that point, we're getting curious, we sound like a lawyer on cross-examination because we haven't done a good job of managing our own emotions. And then they get triggered again, and you've undone all your work. Right? So managing your tone is going to be really important. And one thing that I would suggest people do is if you're having a conversation with somebody who's close to you, probably not going to work in a transactional negotiation, but with a partner, a spouse, colleagues at work who are on your team, whatever it happens to be, after a difficult conversation, ask them this question: how did I make you feel during the conversation? Not what did you think about my approach? How did I make you feel? Because sometimes that answer might be shocking. They might say, yeah, I'll give you an example. One time I thought that I was kind of slowing my tone down, being more comforting with my tone. I was like, Kwame, be mindful of your approach here. I was like, yes. Okay, lower my tone. And then I asked my colleague, and she's like, yeah, that sounded scary. And so here's the reality. Here's the reality. We don't know how we sound because when other people are hearing our voice, they're hearing the sound waves going through the air. When we hear our own voice, we're hearing it through our bones. It is the sound reverberating through our mandible, our jawbone, going through the hammer, anvil, and stirrup, hitting our tympanic membrane in our ear. So we don't even know how we sound in reality. So by talking to people after the fact and asking how we made them feel, what did you think about my tone, is going to help us to moderate how we sound so we can adjust as necessary. So we still want to be authentic, and at the same time we want to make sure that we're mindful of our tones so we're not inadvertently triggering people.
Wow, so that feedback loop is so transparent. We're really putting that feedback loop onto every interaction so that we can improve. And because we're taking negotiation seriously, because it is everywhere, and therefore we need to improve. So the benefits of negotiation and just becoming skilled at it, it's that level of commitment to becoming a good negotiator, to becoming an expert negotiator.
Bingo.
That's it. Well, so then, okay, right, we've got the 3 steps to compassionate curiosity, and we're getting better and we've got the feedback coming through. And now we're able to handle and approach a difficult conversation. But what about confidence in negotiation? Like, so does that improve with the feedback? Or what if we start getting feedback and it's like, yeah, you were scary, like you said, or you just didn't come across how you thought? Like, what should we be doing to get our mindset right? Because what you mentioned earlier was, yes, it is about how you say things, tone, body language. There's a whole skill set, but it's not just the skill set. There's a mindset. But what about that?
Yeah, and listen, this is something I've explored deeply because when I started writing the first book, I wanted feedback from my audience. So I did a survey. What is the thing that you're most concerned about? What would you like me to write about? And the two words that came up were confidence and conflict. So that's where the TED Talk name, then the book
Mm,
name, Finding Confidence in Conflict, came from. And so it was really interesting because a lot of times in the negotiation industry, what we've been doing is giving recipes to people who are afraid to get in the kitchen. So
mm,
it's not an issue of them not knowing what to do. They don't have the confidence to put it into action when it matters most. And so what we have to do is if we recognize that we're lacking in confidence, we have to start to solve for that. And people's performance gap, their confidence gap is going to come from different places. And so it takes a lot of really open and vulnerable self-negotiation for
mm,
us to explore and figure out what hole we need to fill, and so for me it was the fear of losing relationships. I was always afraid of losing relationships. And so the thing that turned me into a people pleaser was me being a Caribbean American. I had an accent. I was different. I lived in a community that was small, all white. And so I remember this time on the playground where nobody would play with me. I would go to different people on the playground, ask them to play with me, and they all said no. And I just started bawling. And I said,
mm,
I will never allow myself to feel this way again. And so after that, I made a lot of friends. I became like the most popular kid in school, but it made me deathly afraid of conflict. And so I had to reframe the story I was telling myself about conflict. Conflict is an opportunity. And it's an opportunity for me to find the relationships that really matter for me. And it's also an opportunity for me to identify and remove malignant relationships with minimal damage. And once I realized, like, hey, these difficult conversations are not bad. This is an opportunity. I can move toward it. That was the thing that helped me to turn it around. And so everybody's story is going to be different, but it takes a little bit of introspection to figure out what deep down inside of you is holding you back so you can begin to overcome it.
wow. So it's something like your negotiation style is predicated on who you were before, what stories you've got going on. And if you're a people pleaser or you're something else, that's going to lead to a tendency that you're going to display in negotiation, or to stop you wanting to have difficult conversations and leading in that way. What
Yeah.
what trains you then? So you're a people, I resonate with that as well. Like in my career early on, you're doing things to fit in, but you're not authentically being you. And then you realize,
Yeah.
hey, this is really my identity. Like I need to change and I need to tackle some of these things. Like there's two parts, right? One, what triggered you to then realize that you needed to address these difficult conversations? You needed to be able to do that in order to thrive. And then two, when you were able to do that and you were in the difficult conversations, like how did it play out? Like you're obviously getting more confident as you go, and you've set up the American Negotiation Institute. And but how long did it take for you to see the effects, and what were the benefits of those difficult conversations?
The effects started to change almost instantly, but it's a lifelong journey. I'm still evolving, and I think that's really important to recognize. Like, it's a never ending journey of self exploration and growth. And for me, the thing that triggered it was a mentor letting me know that he understood that I had big goals, big dreams, and he said this inability to have difficult conversations is going to hold you back. You have to understand there's a difference between being liked and being respected.
Yeah.
And I really took that to heart. And so my undergrad degree is in psychology, which is probably obvious now by this conversation,
Yeah.
right? And so I started to treat my fear of difficult conversations like a true phobia. So using the principles of cognitive behavioral therapy. So we have problematic thought patterns. We want to replace that with thought patterns that are both true and empowering. And then also when you think about a phobia, what you would do is you would have exposure therapy. So if you're afraid of spiders, you might start off
Mhm.
in therapy looking at an image of a spider, right? And so then you might go to having a spider in a room in a box on the other side of the room. and then you slowly get closer, and then at the end of the therapy, you can get the spider crawling on your hand. I don't want spiders crawling on my hand anyway, but you get the point, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So for me, with difficult conversations, I started to take every single opportunity to practice. And so my life philosophy is everything's practice. Even if you're going into like the biggest business negotiation of your life, that's practice, because as you continue to develop, there'll probably be a bigger one down the road. So everything is practice. So I would start to ask for things that I didn't think I could get. So there's a great TED talk called 100 Days of Rejection by Jia Zhang. And so it's a great book, a great TED
I
talk.
love this one.
And
Yeah.
so I love it. Yeah, it's so good. And so what I started to do was ask for things I didn't think I could get. And just like him, I started to get it. So I was actually seeking rejection, because I realized, okay, it's that fear of rejection that is holding me back. So I'm going to essentially develop a callus that allows me to accept rejection, feel it, and recognize that there's still life on the other side. And when you think about rejection, there's an emotional pain that goes along with it. And they've shown in studies that the pain is so real that if you give somebody an analgesic like Tylenol or something, it actually lowers the pain associated with rejection. So we can't, yeah, it's a true pain. And so I wanted to diminish the potency of that pain by hyper exposure to it. And so for me, that helped me to realize, oh yeah, this is not that bad. I'm still here, right? And so I think for people, especially folks in the business sense, sometimes we feel like we need these deals. And a really simple and a way to think about leverage is whoever needs the deal the most loses. So you need this deal. I don't need it that bad. Do better. Do better. Do better. Give me more, right? And so you end up capitulating more. And so one thing that we can do to help circumvent that is do what I call a survivability test. If I lose this deal, if I lose this relationship, whatever happens, how would I survive? What would I do? What would I do to make it through? And you get really granular with that intellectual exercise, and you realize I can still have a very good life if I don't get this deal. It's really not that bad. And so recognizing that you have a clear backup plan, dare I say BATNA, best alternative to a negotiated agreement, that can give you the confidence you need to show up in these conversations. So they're different things. So you can see overcoming that fear, overcoming that phobia from the psychological sense, also developing that BATNA, recognizing that you can survive even if you don't get those deals, and just figuring out what it is that is leading to your confidence gap and giving yourself a specific approach to address it is the way to go forward.
Master plan. Wow, you just made the blueprint there. Yeah. I love it. I love that. It's a lot about self-growth. And I can see that like once you make the decision, because obviously you had a mentor and then it resonates. You were like, look, yeah, of course, I need to be able to address these difficult conversations. I can't go through life being a people pleaser, although it would feel easier. It's not going to get you that success. But I guess then with the compassionate curiosity, that's born out of really understanding people. When you get to that deeper level, I also had a psychology undergrad, and I love this topic. I love negotiation, how it feeds in to psychology, and how the two kind of understanding people, understanding the brain, understanding the science behind it, but also the art behind it. Like your philosophy, what was it? Everything is practice. Oh my goodness, that's just so good. That's so good. I'm going to take everything is practice. If you take that, do you think that then having that as a philosophy allows you to be less stressed, less anxious? Because when things go wrong, like everything's practice, baby. It's all
Exactly. It makes it makes it almost playful, because think about the example that you gave, because you had a difficult conversation last week and it didn't go well. So you just say, yeah, that was a practice session. Let me go back. Let me see what I did well. I'm going to do more of that. Let me see what I didn't do that well. Let me make sure not to make that mistake again. That's it. And so every time you have these conversations, you analyze it and you can always get a little bit better. So in my mind, you can win every time as long as you're doing two things. As long as you're number one, putting yourself in the best position to succeed, right? I'm trying the very best I can, doing the best that I can in the moment under the circumstances. And number two, if I get better every single time by thinking about it with this practice mentality, going back, reviewing the tape, and trying to make myself better for the next time.
Oh my goodness, yeah. I mean, yeah, because the tendency would be in that scenario for me when I was looking at it, like if I had that philosophy, which now I do, everything's press, that's amazing. right? I would look at it and go, yeah, I need to refine that. But like, I'm judging myself going, hey, dude, you write books on negotiation. You shouldn't be messing this kind of stuff up. But the truth is you do, right? And that's it. Like with your everything is practice, take that, just apply it. You're like, yeah, cool, we'll get better next time. Let's go. It's just brilliant.
Bingo.
It's brilliant.
Exactly.
Oh my goodness. I can't believe the time has gone already. And it's
Wow.
and this is like the fastest ever podcast, but it's 45 minutes. And I know you're a very busy man. With the American Institute, then, what are you doing to help companies? And just sort of end on this point, like obviously you've got two great books that people can purchase. In terms of the American Institute, though, like what is it that you do for companies? How can people get involved? Like where should they go to find you and to work with you?
Yeah, so visit our website, americannegotiationinstitute.com, and we put on trainings that help to make your difficult conversations easier. And I think that's the beautiful thing about it. And you know this, Tim, the negotiation is shaped like water. Wherever there are people, negotiation will fit in. So we work with companies who are doing negotiation, procurement, sales negotiations, legal negotiations, whatever it happens to be. But we also work with leaders who just are having difficult conversations. And it's
Mm.
been so cool working with companies like Apple, NASA, all these different types of the U.S. Army as well. Because everybody at the end of the day, we're people talking to people, and the same psychology applies. It's just about figuring out how it fits in your specific situation.
And that's the key, that last sentence. And that's what you do best, because you can go in and talk and you can have a conversation where people are dealing with CEOs, boards, or it's asymmetric power and their VCs or whatever it is. Like you've got all our procurement where they're just like, I'm just going to win whatever. Like I'm a master. I'm just going to say no until you break. Like you've got the ability to train in all of those different lenses. And that last sentence is exactly it. Kwame, my man, I'm sad that this is over already, and but thank you so much for coming on. You've given so much today. The audience, right from the start, like just go back and watch this again and again and again, because there is a lot of gold that we didn't get a chance to unpack, but Kwame dropped it left, right, and center right from the get-go, especially how to deal with difficult people, especially if they're going at you and trying to make you crumble. Thank you so much for coming on. Been an absolute privilege.
My pleasure. Thank you, my friend. Appreciate it.